She came through Amos Creed's north gate with blood on her cuff, dust in her mouth, and a boy tucked under a quilt beside her, while 3 riders drew up on the ridge as if they already owned whatever frightened her. Amos was in the breaking pen with a black stallion that had thrown 2 hired hands that week. He kept one hand on the rope and one steady eye on the horse when the woman called, "If you shut that gate, they'll take my boy before dark." Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We always like knowing who's by the fire with us. The stallion struck once, iron shoe cracking hard against packed earth. Amos stepped closer instead of back, spoke low, and the horse gave him 1 thin inch of peace. Only then did he turn. The woman on the wagon seat sat straight from will alone. Her sleeve was stiff with old blood. The boy beside her held a carved wooden horse so tightly his fingers had gone pale under the dirt. The riders on the ridge saw Amos looking and checked their pace. That told him enough. Men who meant no harm did not pause at his fence line to measure their chances. He walked to the gate with the rifle resting in the crook of his arm. "Name?" "Lena Whitcomb." The boy said nothing. "Who's after you?" "Vernon Pike's men." A white line showed in the old scar along Amos's jaw. "Why would Pike waste riders on you?" She reached into her coat and held out a folded letter, soft at the creases. "Because my husband is dead. Because my son stands between Pike and a spring-fed parcel he's wanted for 3 years. And because my husband told me that if he didn't come home, I was to bring the boy here." Amos did not take the paper right away. The riders were nearer now, one of them already shaping his mouth around the kind of lie men use when they mean to do ugly work with legal words wrapped around it. "Who was your husband?" "Daniel Creed." The evening seemed to stop where it stood. Amos took the letter then. The hand inside was blunt, slanted, familiar enough to hurt. "If Lena comes, you let her in. If the boy comes, you claim him. Don't let him pay for what sat between you and me. His name is Benjamin Daniel Whitcomb. Don't let Pike put his hands on him. Daniel." Amos folded the paper once and looked at the child. Benjamin looked back with that grave, watchful stillness children earn when life has been unkind too early. The lead rider called from outside the fence. "Evening, Creed. County matter. We've come for the widow and the child." Amos opened the gate just wide enough for the wagon. "Drive in." Lena did. He dropped the bar behind her, then rested both hands on the top rail. "Pike's got papers," the rider said. "Then Pike can bring them himself," Amos replied, "and he can bring the sheriff with him. This widow owes debt." "That's so. The boy's no kin of yours." Amos lifted the rifle and laid it easy across the rail. "He is now." The rider's smile tightened. "You mean to start trouble over a woman you never met, and a brat who ain't yours?" "I mean for you to leave my gate before I decide the second horse from the left is lame enough to put down." Nobody moved for a moment. Then the second horse from the left stamped and tossed its head, and that was enough to break the spell. The men backed off and turned downhill. "Pike'll come," the lead rider called. "He's welcome to knock." When they were gone, Lena climbed down and nearly hit the dirt. Amos caught her by the elbow. The boy followed, stiff from the ride, still holding the wooden horse. Amos noticed the child favored one side and made no sound even when his boots hit hard ground. He cleaned Lena's grazed arm in the bunkhouse. She sat straight through the pain, breathing through her nose while the boy held the basin with both hands. "What happened to his voice?" Amos asked. Lena stared at the wall. He had won before his father died. The room went quiet except for the wind ticking a loose shutter outside. Finally Amos said, "You can stay the night. I asked for 1 season. I heard you. I'll work for it. I don't need a farmhand." She put her hand on the boy's shoulder. The sharpness went out of her voice then, leaving only bone-deep weariness and something fiercer under it. "I don't need a farmhand either. I need a father." Amos looked at Benjamin. The boy stared down at the floorboards, not moving, not asking, carrying his fear so carefully it looked older than he was. Behind them the north pasture lay blue in the last light. Amos had lived a long time inside silence because silence asked so little of him. But Daniel's letter was still warm in his hand, and memory had already started doing its cruel work. A son standing just so in a doorway. A little girl laughing by a river running too high. The kind of loss that dries into stubbornness and gets mistaken for character. "If you send us away at dawn," Lena said, "say it plain. I won't beg. But Pike will take the land, and he'll send Ben east or keep him close until the papers are signed." Daniel said you were many things, but not a man who let a child pay for grown men's failures. Amos closed his eyes once. He had failed one child already. When he opened them, he said, the bunkhouse roof leaks on the west side. Kitchen door sticks in the morning. Boy sleeps in the house tomorrow. Lena blinked. Why? Because if Pike comes counting beds, he sees family, not charity. Benjamin finally looked up. Amos took the carved horse from his rigid fingers and turned it over. Daniel's knife marks showed in the rough little mane. That was the moment the season began, and the moment none of them belonged to the lives they had planned anymore. By sunrise, the ranch had already changed around them. Lena found his flour, moved the coffee pot before it burned, and opened windows against the stale smell of old grief. Benjamin sat at the table with Amos's hound under one hand and the wooden horse under the other, watching everything. He watched Amos patch tack, watched Lena sweep, watched the way two strangers circled each other while pretending they were only sharing breakfast. Near noon, the black stallion in the pen started hurling himself at the rails again. Amos reached for the rope, but Lena said, don't crowd him from the front. He's blind a little on the left. Somebody heard him from where he couldn't see it coming. Amos stopped. She walked into the pen with the calm of a woman who had no time left for performance. She let the horse smell her sleeve, spoke around him instead of at him, then laid one brief hand against his neck and stepped away before he thought to fight the touch. The stallion quit slamming the rails. His head lowered by an inch, then another. What's your trade? Amos asked. Staying useful. That ain't a trade. It is for women who've had to eat. By evening, the story had reached town and come back in the person of Mrs. Pritchard, the preacher's widow, who had a spine like fence wire and the habit of pinching her lips together when deciding whether a thing was sinful or simply inconvenient. So it's true, she said, studying Lena's bandaged arm, Benjamin's silence, and Amos standing in front of both. You've taken them in. For now. People say Vernon Pike holds the widow's note. People say many things, Lena replied. Mrs. Pritchard sniffed. The circuit judge comes Friday. We know the calendar, Amos said. The widow set down a basket of eggs and glanced at Benjamin. The child edged closer to Amos without seeming to know he had done it. Something in her face softened against her will. Boy needs church, she said. Boy needs breakfast more often than sermons, Amos answered. To his surprise, she almost smiled. That too. When she left, Lena exhaled. I've met firing squads kinder than that woman. She brought the good eggs, Amos said. She'll be with us by Wednesday. That night, Lena found him on the porch mending a trace chain by lantern light. The dark smelled of pine smoke and cooling earth. You knew Daniel would send me here? She asked. No. You knew Pike wanted the spring? I knew he'd started asking too many questions about it. Lena stood with one shoulder against the post. He cut Daniel's cinch crossing Red Bluff. A livery boy saw Pike's foreman near the saddle room and got scared quiet after. Daniel rode anyway because if he stayed home, Pike would know he'd been warned. Amos set the chain down. Why didn't you tell the sheriff? The sheriff owed Pike money before his wife buried their first child. Grief makes some people brave, makes others cheap. After a while, Amos said, if I stand for Ben in court, Pike comes after this ranch too. He owns paper on half the valley since the dry years. I know. You still came. I buried my husband with $3 in my pocket and a man smiling at my fence posts. There wasn't anywhere left to go but the place he named. Amos looked out into the dark pasture. You trust strangers quickly. No. I trusted Daniel. That answer sat between them, clean and plain. He could have sent her away then, kept his acres, his silence, and the slow, safe death of a man who asks nothing more of the world. Instead, he told her what Pike would do at the hearing. Pike would ask for guardianship and land together. He would say Lena was unfit and Amos too bitter, too old, too dangerous. He would wrap greed in concern and hope the judge liked the sound of it. Lena turned the broken trace chain in her hands and said, metal always gives at the weakest place. People too, Amos said. Not always. Sometimes the weakest-looking piece is the only one still carrying weight. That line stayed with him long after the lantern burned low. The ranch learned new sounds over the next few days. Benjamin's boots on the kitchen floor at dawn. Lena singing under her breath while she stitched Amos's torn slicker. Amos's own voice more often than usual, giving small instructions that kept turning into conversation. He showed the boy how to hold a hammer by the end and not choke up like a toddler. Benjamin missed the nail twice, struck it clean the third time, and looked at Amos so sharply for approval it near split the old man open. Again, Amos said. The boy smiled without showing teeth. A day later, he followed Amos to the lower pasture where a calf had slipped the fence. Before Amos could point out the track, Benjamin crouched and touched the print with 2 fingers, then pointed toward the cottonwoods. "You see that?" Amos asked. Benjamin nodded. "Good." Amos rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "A home ain't just boards and nails. It's whatever keeps your name from blowing away." Benjamin stored the words away with the seriousness of a child used to keeping precious things hidden. By Wednesday, Mrs. Pritchard returned with preserves and gossip. Pike meant to bring an affidavit calling Lena unstable. The storekeeper had been asked whether Amos drank. Pike's foreman had bought rope and lamp oil in town. "Ropes for what?" Lena asked. "Men who buy rope in groups rarely mean to hang laundry," Mrs. Pritchard said. That night, Amos rode into town. Saturday noise rattled off the boardwalks, wagon wheels, saloon laughter, doors banging in the wind. Vernon Pike stood outside his mercantile in a black coat and silver watch chain, handsome in the way rotten fruit can still shine from a distance. Amos walked straight at him. People felt the shape of trouble and drifted from storefronts to watch. "Creed," Pike said pleasantly, "I hear your charity has outrun your judgment." "Benjamin Wickham is my son's boy," Amos said. "So you claim." "I don't claim. I state." Pike's smile stayed polished. "State it to the judge." "I intend to. And I'll state another thing while I'm here." Amos pitched his voice just high enough for the crowd and no higher. "Any man who rides on my gate after dark looking for that child makes himself my enemy in public. The barber, the postmistress, Sheriff Blevins by the jail door, all of them heard it." Pike heard them hearing it. "You talk like a threatened man," Pike said. "No," Amos answered. "I talk like a man who finally sees the thief." You could feel the street inhale. Pike's eyes cooled. "Careful. You've lived fat on careful men," Amos said. "See how you fare with one who's tired." He left Pike standing on the boardwalk with witnesses all around him. By nightfall, the whole valley knew Amos Creed had publicly claimed the boy. The first stone through his window came after midnight. Another hit the roof. Hoofbeats fled into the cottonwoods, carrying laughter with them. Come morning, someone had nailed a paper to the gatepost. Notice of hearing. Guardianship petition. Debt enforcement. Below it, in another hand, send the boy out and keep your barn. Benjamin read enough to know it mattered. His face went gray. Amos tore the paper down, folded it small, then crouched in front of the child. "Ben." The boy's eyes lifted. "Anybody who wants you will have to come through me first." Benjamin stared another second, then gave one hard nod, like a boy entering an agreement he meant to remember. That evening, Lena found Amos cleaning his revolver at the table while beans simmered on the stove and the last red of sunset thinned across the kitchen window. "If you were me," she asked quietly, "would you trust a man who failed his own son?" Amos looked toward the little back room where Benjamin slept. "That depends. Has he kept failing him, or did he just stop too late? If you were in her place, would you have trusted him then, with the boy, the land, and the little future that remained? Tell us in the comments. Some choices look simpler from the outside than they do when your whole life is sitting at the same table. The storm broke the next morning, not from the sky, but from town. Sheriff Blevins arrived with 2 deputies and a paper signed by the clerk, not the judge, ordering Benjamin brought in for temporary custody. County concern, he called it, while looking everywhere but Lena's face. Amos read the order and folded it. "Judge signed this." Clerk did. "Judge is still on the South Road." "Then it ain't worth the ink yet." The younger deputy, a narrow fellow with eager cruelty around the mouth, stepped toward the porch. "We can take the boy peaceful." Amos moved between him and the door. "You can try." Then the black stallion broke the pen. Rotten timber snapped. The horse came out all white eyes and fury. The tied saddle horses exploded against the hitch rail. The younger deputy stumbled backward straight into danger. Lena was already moving. She seized the trailing rope, wrapped it once around the post, and spoke into the chaos as if she were speaking to a soul instead of an animal. "Easy now. Nobody's touching you. Not today." The stallion hit the rope, fought, checked, then gave half an inch. That half inch kept the deputy from taking hooves in his face. Sheriff Blevins saw it. He saw Lena steady in the dirt, rope burning her palms, saving the very men who had come to steal her child on bad paper. Enough, he snapped. He took back the order. I'll wait on the judge proper. The deputies left with less pride than they had brought. Amos looked at Lena's torn hands. You were supposed to run from trouble, not toward 1,200 pounds of it. She gave him a tired look. And leave you 3 fools to make a funeral out of paperwork. For the first time and longer than he cared to count, Amos laughed. Only once, rough and surprised, but it was enough to make Benjamin smile. Pike answered the insult by dusk. Smoke came first, then the mare screaming. Fire had taken the hay lean-to and was climbing the barn boards like it had been waiting there all summer. Amos ran for the well. Lena formed a line with him, water that was never enough. Benjamin stood frozen only a second before Amos shouted his name and pointed to the geldings. The boy moved. Fast. He knew Amos's knots now. He freed one horse, then another, slapping rumps just as he had been taught. Through the flames, Amos saw a man break from the far side of the barn and run toward the cottonwoods. Tall, black coat, silver chain catching firelight. Pike himself. Amos went after him. Pike's shot came first, clipping Amos high in the shoulder and spinning him into the dirt. By the time he forced himself to one knee, Pike had Benjamin under one arm and a pistol pressed against the boy's ribs. Hold there, Pike called, or the air leaks into your dust. Lena stopped so hard the bucket flew from her hand. Pike dragged Benjamin backward toward his horse. This ends easy if you remember what belongs to men with paper. Come to town by dawn if you want him breathing. Bring your name, your land, and your silence. Benjamin kicked once. Pike struck him across the mouth with the gun hand. Lena made a sound Amos hoped never to hear from any living thing. Then Pike mounted behind the child and rode. Lena took 3 blind steps after them before Amos caught her wrist. No, there's a rifleman in those trees. You chase now, you leave Ben with nobody. The barn cracked behind them. Sparks blew over the yard. Benjamin's carved wooden horse lay in the dirt where it had fallen from his pocket. Amos picked it up. One hind leg had split open in the heat. Inside the hollow would lay a strip of oilskin rolled tighter than cigar paper. It was Daniel's hand again. A copy of the spring deed. A statement naming Pike's forged debt. And one line that seemed to hold the whole dead man inside it. If he comes for Ben, it means I was right. At the bottom, Daniel had signed not only his name, but Pike's crime. Now they knew what Pike feared. And Pike had their boy. Lena got Amos into the old line shack above the creek because it was hidden, dry, and close enough he would not bleed out on the trail. She cut his shirt away, packed the wound, and tied the bandage with hands that shook only after the knot was finished. You do that like practice, Amos said. I buried 2 babies before Ben ever called me Ma. He looked up. She kept her eyes on the cloth in her hands because some truths are easier spoken to work than to a face. One lived 3 days. One didn't see sunset. Daniel found Ben half wild after his sister died birthing him. We took him because there wasn't anyone else, and because grief had already made room in the house. She finally met Amos's eyes. So no, I didn't carry him, but I have worn the skin off both knees praying over him. That counts for something with me. It counts for everything, Amos said. The answer came so quickly it nearly broke her. After a long while, Amos said, when Rose died, I told Daniel to take the herd south while I met a buyer. My daughter asked me to ride with her to the river. I told her after dinner. There was no after. Daniel never forgave me, and I made it easier by pretending I didn't need him to. Lena laid the split toy horse on the table between them. A child doesn't ask whether you deserved another chance, she said softly. He asks whether you'll be there when the dark comes. Amos shut his eyes. When he opened them, something old and empty in his face had changed shape. Not healed. Put to work. We go to town? He asked. Lena shook her head. Pike expects us desperate and private. He wants papers signed where no one can hear the truth. We take him the one thing he can't buy back, which is witnesses. She spread Daniel's oilskin flat. The hearing would be in the church hall because the courthouse roof still leaked. Pike would have been there by dawn, dressed like evidence and speaking for no one. He would call Amos violent and her unstable and hope the valley preferred a rich liar to a poor woman with a dead husband. Then we break him in front of God and neighbors both, Amos said. At the door he stopped and pressed a faded blue ribbon into her hand. Roses. Daniel used to tie it to that horse when he was a boy. Ben should have something of the family on him when we bring him home. Lena took it like something holy. If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we write these stories for. A like and a subscribe help keep the fire lit. By the time sunlight brushed the church steeple, every bench in the hall was full. Vernon Pike stood near the front with Benjamin beside him in a clean shirt that did not belong to the boy. The cut on Benjamin's lip had dried dark. Judge Haver, broad as a cupboard and twice as stern, shuffled papers at the front table, while Sheriff Blevins stood to one side with the look of a man who had slept poorly beside his conscience. Pike was speaking when Amos and Lena entered. As I have said, Your Honor, the ranch was never suitable. Creed is unstable, armed, and hostile to lawful process. The widow has no blood claim to the child and no means beyond sentiment. I seek only to secure the boy's future and protect the value of attached property. By kidnapping him, Lena asked. Every head turned. Pike's polish cracked. You dare use that word in public? I prefer accurate ones when available. Amos walked down the aisle without hurry, shoulder bandaged under his coat. Every step showing pain had come and been refused its victory. He stopped beside Benjamin. The boy made a small sound deep in his throat, the beginning of one. Pike's hand dropped toward his pistol. Half the room saw it. So did Judge Haver. Remove your hand, Mr. Pike. Pike smiled and lifted it away. Lena placed Daniel's oilskin on the table. My husband hid this in his son's toy in case he was killed before he could put it before a court. Read it aloud. Pike lunged. Amos was faster. He caught Pike by the wrist, twisted, and drove him face first into the table hard enough to spill the ink bottle. Sheriff Blevins moved then, not like a debtor but like a lawman late to his own duty, and hauled Pike upright with both arms trapped. Judge Haver read the deed, the statement of forgery, and Daniel's final paragraph naming the clerk's stamp and the witness who had seen it used after dark. The witness was Eli Birch, the little storekeeper who forever polished the same square of counter as if guilt might come off with enough rubbing. He stood in the back pew, gray as dishwater while the room turned to him. I saw it, Eli said at last, voice shaking. Pike's clerk had the widow's note. The county seal came out after closing. Daniel saw it too. I should have spoken. Mrs. Pritchard rose from the third bench like judgment itself. Quiet keeps no child warm, Mr. Birch. It only keeps cowards comfortable. A murmur ran the room. Judge Haver set the papers down. Sheriff, Vernon Pike is charged pending formal complaint with fraud, unlawful seizure of a minor, and suspicion in the death of Daniel Whitcomb. Seize his office, his ledgers, and every paper touching the Whitcomb spring. Pike fought then, not cleverly but like any brute who has finally discovered that money cannot buy back a public collapse. He drove an elbow into Blevins's throat, tore one arm loose, and dragged Benjamin toward him as shield. The room screamed. Lena did not. One of Pike's men had brought the black stallion to town that morning, intending to sell him before anyone asked why he had been moved after a fire. The horse was tied just outside the open church door, all fear and muscle and memory. Lena seized the lead rope, cut it on the sheriff's spur, and gave one sharp command. The stallion came through the doorway like judgment. Not at Benjamin. At the black coat, the silver chain, the raised hand that promised pain. Horses remember the shape of cruelty. Pike flung the boy away to save himself. Amos caught Benjamin and turned. The stallion struck the table, shattered it, and sent Pike sprawling beneath a storm of polished hooves and splintered pine. When the horse cleared, Pike was alive, but not with a wrist fit to sign, a shoulder fit to rule, or a shred of dignity left to hide behind. No one rushed to help him but the law. By noon his office had been opened. By evening the sheriff's men had carried out ledgers enough to ruin half his life. False notes, quiet bribes, land transfers from widows, drunks, and men too unlettered to know what they had signed away. The hotel went under county lock. The mercantile shutters closed. Pike's foreman turned witness before dark to save his own skin. Justice, when it finally arrived, came not as thunder but as inventory. The hearing resumed before supper. Judge Haver invalidated the debt, confirmed Benjamin as Daniel's lawful heir, and named Lena his guardian in full standing. Then he looked at Amos over his spectacles. And you, Mr. Creed? Amos rested one hand on Benjamin's shoulder. If the court's asking whether I mean to keep my grandson under my roof, yes. The judge nodded. Good. Children need more than signatures. They need witnesses who stay. Outside, half the valley waited. Mrs. Pritchard pushed preserves into Lena's hands as if she had mothered this ending from the start. Eli Birch offered lumber for the burn barn. Sheriff Blevins crouched in front of Benjamin and held out the carved horse, now mended and tied with Rose's blue ribbon where the split had been. Benjamin took it, looked at Amos, and with a voice rusty from months of silence spoke his first word. Home. Lena covered her mouth. Amos went still as winter timber, then bent and gathered the boy against his chest like a man who had spent too many years empty and had finally been handed back something living to protect. They rebuilt through summer. The barn first, then the fence line, then the habit of laughter in a house that had forgotten how to make room for it. Lena took over the books because Amos's numbers wandered and because she liked the plain honesty of columns that added true. Amos taught Benjamin to fish the creek, set posts, and listen for weather in the cottonwood leaves. On cool evenings, Lena would sit on the porch step, mending while Amos carved at scraps of pine, and sometimes their shoulders touched without either moving away. He never asked her to leave at season's end. She never packed. When the first snow came, Benjamin ran out into the whitening yard in a coat too big at the sleeves, carrying the new foal's halter while Rose's blue ribbon fluttered from the strap. Lena stood in the doorway laughing, Amos behind her with one hand on the frame and the other around a mug of coffee gone cold because he had forgotten to drink it. The boy turned and shouted for them both to hurry, his voice rising clear through the falling snow. And for a moment, all the lost years between father and son, between grief and mercy, seemed no bigger than the tracks they were leaving behind. Far up the pasture, where the fence met the creek and winter light laid silver over the water, the three of them walked toward the fold together until they were only dark, steady figures moving across the white. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf seamstress sent west as payment on another family's debt, and the scarred ranch cook who was the first man patient enough to learn her hands before he ever tried to earn her heart.